The first time I arrived at St. Daniel's Mental Hospital, the sun was casting a gentle, warm glow over the red brick facade of Century Manor. The building stood ceremoniously, as if no time had passed since its closure decades ago. The windows, though dusty and some shattered, still seemed to gaze out thoughtfully at the world beyond. I had always been drawn to places like this, relics of the past that whispered stories of what used to be. That day, I was not just a visitor. I was an investigator, tasked with documenting the history and the mystery surrounding this infamous asylum. I entered through the main doors, which creaked with a sound that echoed through the empty halls, like a whisper. The air was cold, despite the warmth of the autumn afternoon outside, and as I walked through the foyer, I could almost sense the presence of those who had once inhabited this place. But it was just a building, I told myself, a relic of a time when mental health was misunderstood, and treatments were as much about confinement as they were about care. The first few days at Century Manor were spent cataloging the artifacts left behind: patient records, medical equipment, and personal belongings, all scattered as if everyone had left in a hurry. It was fascinating to piece together the lives that had once revolved around these rooms. Each object held a story, and each story was a step deeper into the heart of the manor. Yet, despite the eerie tingle in the air, everything felt normal enough, until the disturbances began. It started subtly, a misplaced object or a flickering bulb, things I attributed to the decrepit state of the building. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, I noticed a chair that had been moved across the room. At first, I brushed it off as a trick of the mind. Surely I hadn't noticed it earlier. But then there were the sounds. In the dead silence of night, I began to hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, as if a conversation was happening just out of earshot. I assured myself it was the wind playing tricks in the old ducts, or perhaps the settling of the building's foundation. However, when the whispers turned into clear voices, my rational explanations began to falter. I was working late in the office one night when I heard a gentle humming resonate through the hallway. It was a mournful melody, one that seemed to rise and fall with a sorrowful cadence. I stepped out to investigate, my footsteps merging with the sound, creating an eerie duet. Yet, as I reached the corridor, the humming ceased, leaving only the silence to fill the void, a silence that seemed more unnerving than the sound itself. Determined to get to the bottom of these occurrences, I set up recording equipment throughout the manor. I wanted to capture whatever was happening, to prove to myself that there was a logical explanation. For several nights, the equipment recorded nothing unusual, but the air felt thicker, as if the building held its breath, waiting. And then, one morning, as I reviewed the footage, I saw it. A shadow, moving with purpose across the room, devoid of any source or bearer. It was a figure, and it seemed to pause, watching the camera, before dissolving into the darkness. The escalation continued, with doors slamming shut on their own, and once clear mirrors fogging over with messages that vanished as soon as I tried to decipher them. The most chilling was a simple, haunting phrase: "Help us." It was then I felt the true weight of the manor's history press down upon me. The ghosts of St. Daniel's were not just figments of a troubled mind. They were real, and they were reaching out. My nights became sleepless, filled with the constant anticipation of more messages, more signs. I roamed the halls with a flashlight, seeking out the voices that called to me. I began to understand their stories, fragments of pain and longing trapped within the walls. There was the nurse, whose regret over a patient's death kept her tethered to this world, and the patient who never stopped searching for a freedom they never knew. The climax of these encounters came on a stormy night, when the manor seemed to come alive with an energy it had never shown before. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the rain pounded against the walls like a heart-seeking entry. It was then that I saw her, a woman in a white gown, standing at the end of the hallway. Her face was a blur, her features washed away by the rain and shadows, yet her presence was unmistakable. "Please," she whispered, her voice carried by the wind, "help us find peace." I reached out to her, but as I took a step forward, she vanished, leaving me alone with my outstretched hand. The energy in the room dissipated, leaving a palpable silence, as if the building itself had paused to mourn her loss. In the days that followed, I continued my work with a renewed sense of purpose. I began to document not just the physical artifacts, but the tales of those who lingered, hoping that by telling their stories, I could offer them the peace they sought. Yet, even as I prepared to leave Century Manor, I knew the echoes of its past would never fully fade. The whispers and shadows had become a part of me, a lingering fear that the world beyond the visible was more complex than I had ever imagined. Century Manor taught me that the history we see is only a fraction of what truly exists. The ghosts of St. Daniel's remained, not as malevolent spirits, but as remnants of lives interrupted. They were the echoes of emotions too strong to be quelled by time, calling out to anyone who would listen and understand. As I closed the doors to the manor for the last time, I felt their presence like a gentle breeze, a reminder that some stories never end. They simply await the next teller. And so, the haunting of Century Manor continued, a tale etched into the very fabric of its being, as eternal as the bricks and mortar that housed it. The old farmhouse stood alone in a sea of windswept fields, a solitary structure where nature seemed to reclaim its place, slowly but surely. Its weather-beaten wood creaked with every gust, and the once vibrant paint had peeled away, leaving the bare bones of the place exposed to the elements. Despite its dilapidated state, there was a strange allure to it, an invitation whispered on the wind, drawing me in. I had purchased the property on a whim, enamored by its isolation and the quiet it promised. I'd grown weary of the city's relentless noise, the clamor of people and machines that never ceased. Here, amidst the rustling cornstalks and the occasional call of a distant bird, I found the peace I craved. The farmhouse, despite its appearance, offered a refuge, an escape from the ceaseless demands of modern life. The first few weeks were uneventful. I busied myself with minor repairs, brushing off the cobwebs and musty smells that clung to every corner. The silence was profound, almost tangible. It wrapped around me like a heavy quilt, each room filled with echoes of a time long past. I often found myself standing by the window, gazing out at the horizon where the fields met the sky, feeling an inexplicable sense of contentment. But then, the first disturbance came. It was subtle at first, a shadow glimpsed from the corner of my eye, the kind that flits away the moment you turn to face it. It happened only occasionally, and I dismissed it as a trick of the light, the way shadows dance under the waning twilight. Yet, as days turned to weeks, these occurrences grew more frequent. The shadows took on forms, fleeting, indistinct, but undeniably there. One evening, as I sat reading in the small parlor, I heard it, a soft, mournful sigh. It was the sound of despair, a whisper that sent a chill racing down my spine. I looked up, heart pounding, eyes scanning the room for the source. Nothing, only the gentle creaking of the floorboards in response to the evening breeze. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just the house settling, that old structures had their own language, their own stories to tell. Yet, the disturbances continued. Objects would move from their places. A book, a cup, my reading glasses. Things I was certain I left in one spot would appear elsewhere, as if nudged by unseen hands. I tried to rationalize it, blaming my own forgetfulness, but a seed of doubt took root in my mind. I found myself on edge, every creak and groan of the house feeding into a growing unease. The escalation was gradual, but undeniable. The sighs turned to whispers, unintelligible yet laden with emotion. I would awaken in the middle of the night, my room filled with a suffocating presence, as if the air itself was watching, waiting. I began to see them, the shades. They would appear in moments of solitude, hovering on the periphery of my vision. Translucent figures, their features blurred, obscured by time and sorrow. They never approached, but their presence was inescapable, an oppressive weight that grew heavier with each passing day. It was during one such night, a storm raging outside, that the climax of this haunting unfolded. Lightning cast stark, fleeting illuminations through the windows, and the rain battered against the walls with a fury that seemed almost sentient. I was in the kitchen, preparing a late supper, when I felt it. A cold breath against the back of my neck. I turned sharply, heart hammering in my chest, and there they were. Not shadows, not fleeting glimpses, but fully formed apparitions standing in the doorway. There were 3 of them, a man, a woman, and a child. Their eyes held a depth of sorrow and longing that transfixed me, rendering me immobile. The room seemed to fall away, the only thing anchoring me to reality, the intensity of their gaze. They said nothing, yet their story unfolded in my mind, a family torn apart by tragedy, their lives snuffed out long before their time. The farmhouse had been their home, and now it was their prison. As suddenly as they appeared, they were gone, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. But something lingered, a sense of understanding, of connection. The storm outside had abated, leaving a calm in its wake, but the whispers remained, softer now, almost a lullaby. I realized then that the house was never truly mine. It belonged to them, these unresting souls, bound to the land by a past I could never fully comprehend. In the days that followed, the fear subsided, replaced by a solemn acceptance. The disturbances continued, but they no longer filled me with dread. Instead, they felt like a communion, a bridge between the living and the dead. I came to cherish the whispers, the touches, and the shadows as part of the house's identity. My presence there was a part of that story, a witness to the eternal dance between the past and the present. Yet, a lingering fear remained, an understanding that one day I too might become part of this haunting tableau. The house, with its secrets and its stories, would continue to stand long after I was gone, a testament to the inexorable passage of time and the restless nature of lost souls. In this place, solitude was not an absence, but a presence, a reminder that we are never truly alone. And so I remain, the caretaker of a legacy that is not mine, watching over the fields and the spirits they harbor. I listen to their whispers in the night, and I find a strange comfort in their company, knowing that in this quiet corner of the world, the past is never truly past, and the souls that wander here will forever be unresting. The farmhouse stood silent and forgotten on the crest of a hill, surrounded by tangled weeds and gnarled trees that clawed at the sky. It had once been a place of life and laughter, a refuge from the world. But now it was a relic, its glory days buried beneath dust and neglect. The paint on its wooden boards had peeled away, revealing the gray beneath, and its windows were like eyes that watched without seeing. I had always been drawn to places like this, places where the past lingered like a whisper on the wind. Maybe it was the quiet, or the stories such places seem to hold, tales woven into the very fabric of their walls. I first came upon the old farmhouse while wandering the fields one autumn afternoon, the air crisp and the sky a deep, endless blue. There was a certain magnetism to it, an allure that beckoned me closer. I paused at the edge of the overgrown drive. My curiosity piqued and felt a strange sense of homecoming. I imagined the lives that had once unfolded here, the births, the celebrations, the quiet evenings by a crackling fire. It was easy to envision, and even easier to entertain, the thought of stepping through its creaking doors, to explore what memories might still linger. As I approached, the wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves and sending a shiver down my spine. The air seemed to thicken, the atmosphere charged with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I brushed it off as the chill of the season, an overactive imagination, fueled by too many late-night ghost stories. But even as I told myself this, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone, that the house itself was watching my every move. The first disturbance came as I crossed the threshold. The door, heavy and weather-beaten, groaned open on its hinges, a sound that echoed in the empty hollows of my mind. The interior was as expected, dark, musty, the stale air thick with the scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced through gaps in the boarded windows, and the silence was profound, almost sacred. I wandered through the rooms, each one telling its own story. The parlor, with its faded floral wallpaper peeling like the skin from a forgotten fruit, spoke of genteel gatherings long past. The kitchen, with its iron stove and empty cupboards, whispered of meals prepared and shared, the clatter of dishes, and the warmth of a family. It was in the upstairs bedroom where I first felt it, the palpable coldness that wrapped around my shoulders like a shawl. At first, it was subtle, a barely there chill that could have been a draft. But as I stood there, looking at the bed, its frame still intact beneath a thick layer of dust, the cold intensified, sinking into my bones. I felt an urge to leave, an instinctual warning, but stubborn curiosity anchored me in place. As the days turned to weeks, I found myself returning to the farmhouse, unable to resist its silent pull. Each visit revealed more of its secrets, subtle clues left behind by those who had once called it home. A child's toy, forgotten and faded beneath a bed. A photograph, its edges curled with age, depicting a family frozen in time, their expressions solemn yet kind. I was piecing together a history, a narrative of love and loss, and it fascinated me. But with each visit, the disturbances grew more frequent, more intrusive. It began with the sounds, footsteps overhead, the creaking of the old wooden floorboards under a weight I couldn't see. Then came the whispers, soft and indistinct, like the murmur of a distant conversation I was not part of. I would stand in the parlor, heart pounding, straining to make out the words, but they always eluded me, slipping away like smoke through fingers. One evening, as twilight descended and shadows lengthened, I saw her. A figure standing by the window, backlit by the waning light, her form blurred and insubstantial. She was there for just a moment, a heartbeat, and then she was gone, leaving only the faintest impression in my mind. I felt no fear, only an overwhelming sadness, as if I had glimpsed something tragic and irrevocable. The escalation was gradual, but undeniable. What began as curious visits turned into a compulsion. I spent hours in that house, drawn to its secrets like a moth to flame. The sounds grew louder, more persistent, and I began to sense not just one presence, but many. It was as if the house was filled with the spirits of those who had lived and died within its walls, each one clamoring for attention, for acknowledgement. I started to lose track of time, the boundary between the living and the dead blurring in the dim light of the farmhouse. Sleep eluded me, my dreams haunted by faces I did not know, voices calling out in anguish. I learned to navigate the house by instinct, moving through its rooms with a familiarity that was not entirely my own. The ghosts had become part of my world, or perhaps I had become part of theirs. The climax came on a stormy night. The wind howled outside, rain lashed against the windows, and the old house groaned and shifted like a ship in a storm. I was in the parlor when it happened, a presence descending upon me with the force of a tidal wave. It was her again, the woman by the window, only now she was close, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide with sorrow. She reached out, a silent plea in her gaze, and I felt her anguish wash over me like ice. I could sense the others too, shadows gathering in the corners, their whispers rising to a crescendo. They had a story to tell, a story of betrayal and loss, of a family torn apart by greed and tragedy. The woman had been the matriarch, beloved and respected, her life cut short by a deceitful act that had doomed them all to this restless existence. As her presence enveloped me, I understood what they wanted: to be heard, to be remembered, to find peace in the acknowledgement of their suffering. It was a burden I felt unworthy of bearing, yet in that moment, I could not turn away. I spoke their story aloud, my voice trembling with the weight of their pain, and as I did, the house fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a shroud. But the fear did not leave with them. It lingered in the shadows, in the corners of my mind, a reminder of the thin veil between worlds. I left the farmhouse that night, the rain washing away the last vestiges of daylight, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay beyond the realm of the living. The house remained as it was, an eternal guardian of secrets best left undisturbed. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to normalcy, to forget the ghosts and their tragic tale, but it was impossible. They haunted my thoughts, their whispers echoing in the quiet moments, reminding me of promises made and debts unpaid. I felt their presence in the rustle of leaves, the creak of floorboards, in every shadow that stretched across my path. The farmhouse stood empty again, its doors closed, its windows dark, yet I knew it was not truly abandoned. Unseen and unstoppable, the souls remained, bound to the earth by the weight of their unfinished story. I was but a passing visitor in their endless night, a brief flicker of warmth in a world gone cold. And though I had left the place behind, I understood that I carried a part of them with me, a part of their sorrow etched into my soul. In the end, the house on the hill was more than just a building. It was a testament to the enduring nature of love and grief, a reminder that some stories never die. They linger like shadows at the edge of the light, waiting for someone to listen, and as long as they waited, the farmhouse would stand, a silent witness to the unresting souls within its walls. It was a late autumn afternoon when I arrived at the old farmhouse. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the wide fields that stretched out in every direction. The air was crisp, with a biting chill that hinted at the winter to come. I had inherited this place from a distant relative I barely knew, a great uncle whose existence I had only discovered upon receiving the letter from the solicitor. The farmhouse stood in isolation, an unremarkable structure of weathered wood and peeling paint, its windows dark and uninviting. As I stepped out of my car, I took a moment to absorb the scene. The land was vast and empty, save for the twisted remains of an old barn and some overgrown patches of what might once have been a garden. The silence was profound, almost palpable, as if the world itself was holding its breath. It was a place that seemed untouched by time, frozen in a state of elegant decay. I made my way to the front door, the wooden boards creaking underfoot like voices whispering secrets from the past. The key turned with a reluctant click, and the door swung open with a groan, revealing a hallway dimly lit, by the last rays of sunlight filtering through dusty windows. The air inside was stale, carrying the scent of old wood and neglect. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course, the electricity would have been cut off long ago. As I explored the rooms, I found them sparsely furnished, each piece covered with a shroud-like sheet, adding to the air of abandonment. A sense of unease crept over me, a feeling that I was intruding upon something long forgotten. Yet, there was nothing overtly sinister about the place, nothing that would suggest it was anything other than an ordinary deserted farmhouse. It was not until the first night that I began to sense something was amiss. Lying in the old iron bed, I stared up at the patchwork of shadows cast by the moonlight through the window. The silence that had seemed so comforting during the day now felt oppressive, as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I heard it then, a faint rustling sound, like the soft brush of fabric against fabric. It drifted through the air, seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere, all at once. I sat up, straining to hear, my heart thudding in my chest. There it was again, more distinct this time, a murmur, barely perceptible, like distant voices carried on the wind. I told myself it was nothing, just the creaks and groans of an old house settling into the night. But deep down, I knew that was not true. There was something here with me, something unspeakable beneath the veneer of normalcy. The disturbances continued over the following days. During the daylight hours, the house appeared unchanged, its secrets hidden beneath layers of dust and neglect. But at night, the atmosphere shifted, growing tense and electric. The whispers returned, sometimes accompanied by the sensation of a cold breeze brushing past me, even though all the windows were tightly shut. Objects would be found out of place, moved from where I had left them, though I had been alone in the house. I began to feel a presence, an awareness that clung to the shadows, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was a heaviness to the air, as if the house was filled with unseen eyes, tracking my every movement. I could feel them, those unresting souls, trapped between this world and the next, their anguish resonating within the very walls. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, vivid and disturbing. I dreamed of spectral figures drifting through the rooms, their faces obscured by veils of shadow. They would reach out to me, their fingers like tendrils of mist, beckoning me to join them in their endless dance of despair. Each morning I awoke drenched in sweat, the echoes of their ghostly cries ringing in my ears. The final night was the worst. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with a sense of impending doom. I lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that something was drawing near, something that could not be stopped. The whispers began again, more insistent this time, rising and falling like the tide, a chorus of lamentation that pulled at my soul. I rose from the bed, compelled by a force I could not resist. The house seemed to pulse with energy, each room a labyrinth of echoes and shadows. As I wandered through the darkened halls, the voices grew louder until they were a cacophony, filling my mind with their desperate pleas. It was then that I saw them, the ghosts of the past emerging from the shadows. Their forms were insubstantial, flickering like candle flames in a draft, yet their presence was undeniable. They surrounded me, a swirling mass of despair and longing. I could see their faces now, contorted with sorrow, their eyes empty and pleading. Their mouths moved in silent supplication, but I could hear their words, clear as a bell. They spoke of betrayal and loss, of lives cut short and dreams shattered. They were the souls of those who had once lived here, trapped by the weight of their unfinished business, unable to move on. And they wanted me to understand, to share in their grief. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was not just an intruder in their home. I was a part of this story, bound by the same ties that kept them here. The house had claimed me, just as it had claimed them, and there was no escape. The climax came with the dawn, the first light of day breaking over the horizon. The ghosts began to fade, their forms dissolving into the morning mist, yet their presence lingered, a shadow that would never leave. I stood there, alone in the silence, my heart heavy with the weight of their sorrow. As the days turned into weeks, the farmhouse became a place of both solace and torment. I had come to understand the restlessness of the souls trapped within its walls, their yearning for release, a constant undercurrent in my thoughts. Though the hauntings had ceased, their echoes remained, a reminder of the thin veil that separated my world from theirs. I could never truly leave the farmhouse, not in spirit, for it was a part of me now, as I was a part of it. The unresting souls had found a place within my heart, their whispers a permanent fixture in the quiet of the night. And while the world outside moved on, I remained bound to this haunted place, a guardian of its secrets, forever listening to the echoes of the past. I first laid eyes on the old farmhouse during one of those long drives meant to clear my mind. I often found solace in the back roads that snaked through the countryside, the rolling fields, and the distant line of trees that framed the horizon. It was an overcast day, the sky a dull gray, casting a muted light over everything. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of rain that never seemed to come. The farmhouse stood on the edge of a forgotten road, set back from the cracked asphalt by a wide swath of overgrown grass. To the casual observer, it was just another relic of a bygone era, its once white paint now peeling and faded to a dull, ghostly gray. Shutters hung at odd angles, and an old swing set, its chains rusted, creaked softly in the breeze. There was something about it that drew me in. Perhaps it was the quiet desolation, or the way it seemed untouched by the passage of time. I parked my car on the shoulder of the road and walked up the gravel path leading to the front porch. The boards creaked under my weight, and I hesitated for a moment, listening. There was only the sound of the wind whispering through the trees and the distant call of a crow. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of dust and decay. The house, though empty, seemed to hum with a strange energy. I wandered through the rooms, each one a time capsule filled with the remnants of a life once lived. Old furniture covered in white sheets, a piano in the corner of the living room with yellowed keys, and a collection of faded photographs that lined the mantelpiece. It was in this state of reflective calm that I first felt the disturbance. As I stood in what must have once been a child's bedroom, I heard it, the faintest sound of laughter, like the echo of a memory not quite forgotten. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill down my spine. I turned quickly, expecting to find someone behind me, but the room was empty. The sound had faded, replaced by the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window. I tried to rationalize it, a trick of the mind, perhaps, brought on by the isolation and the eerie stillness of the place. Yet, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I made my way back to the car, the echo of that laughter still ringing in my ears, and drove away, telling myself it was nothing. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the farmhouse lingered in the back of my mind, a haunting presence I couldn't quite dismiss. I found myself returning to that same road, drawn inexplicably to the place despite my better judgment. Each visit revealed more subtle disturbances, a shadow in the corner of my eye, a whispered word on the edge of hearing. On my third visit, I decided to dig deeper. I brought along a camera, hoping to capture evidence of what I felt, but could not see. As I moved through the house, the air seemed heavier, charged with an unseen force. It was as if the house itself was breathing, alive in some unfathomable way. In the basement, I found remnants of old newspapers, their headlines barely legible. They spoke of a family tragedy, a fire that had claimed the lives of the residents decades ago. There was something about the story that resonated with the sensations I had felt in the house. The laughter, the shadows, the whispers. Were they echoes of those trapped by the flames, unable to find peace? The idea of restless spirits seemed preposterous, a notion fit for horror novels rather than reality. Yet, standing in that dark, musty basement, I couldn't help but feel their presence. It was as if the house was a liminal space, a boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. My heart pounded in my chest as I ascended the stairs to the ground floor. The house was different now, charged with an intensity that was almost palpable. As I stepped into the living room, I saw it, a figure standing by the window, its form indistinct, like a shadow made of smoke. I froze, instinct screaming for me to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The figure turned slowly, its face obscured, but I felt its eyes on me, piercing through the veil of fear. A voice, soft and sorrowful, filled the room. Why? Why do you disturb us? The question lingered in the air, heavy with accusation and despair. I stumbled back, my mind racing to comprehend the incomprehensible. The air vibrated with energy, and the room seemed to twist and warp around me. It was as if the house itself was crying out, filled with the pain and rage of those who could not move on. In a blind panic, I bolted for the door, the echo of that sorrowful voice trailing after me. Outside, the sky had darkened, the storm that had been threatening now, unleashed in full fury. Lightning split the sky, and the wind howled with a ferocity that matched the chaos within. I drove away, my heart racing, the farmhouse disappearing in the distance like a specter fading into the mist. But even as I put miles between us, the presence lingered, a weight pressing down on my soul. Days passed, but the memory of that encounter haunted me. Sleep was elusive, my dreams filled with shadows and whispers. I found myself drawn to the farmhouse, unable to resist its pull. It was as if the spirits had reached out, tethering me to their sorrow, refusing to let go. On my final visit, the air was thick with anticipation. The house loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the stormy sky. I stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind me. The air was charged, electric with the presence of those who dwelled within. The shadows moved, forming the indistinct shapes of figures long gone. They surrounded me, their presence felt rather than seen. I stood in the center of the room, heart pounding, as the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping and intertwining. In that moment, I understood. The house was not merely haunted, it was a vessel, a prison for souls unable to move on. Their stories, their pain, were etched into its very walls, calling out for release. I spoke into the void, my words swallowed by the darkness. "What do you want from me?" The voices quieted, and one rose above the rest, a child's voice, filled with longing. "Remember us." With those words, the air shifted, the tension easing as if a burden had been lifted. The shadows receded, and the oppressive weight of the house diminished. I stood there, breathing deeply, the air now still and calm. The presence was still there, but its anger had faded, replaced by a quiet sadness. I left the farmhouse for the last time, the rain falling softly around me. As I drove away, I glanced back one final time. The house stood silent, its secrets still hidden within its walls, but its hold on me finally broken. The experience lingered, a shadow on the edge of my consciousness, but I felt a strange sense of peace. I had given the spirits what they sought, a promise that their stories would not be forgotten. As the road stretched out before me, I felt a weight lift, the sense of being watched fading with each passing mile. Yet deep down, I knew the farmhouse would always be there, waiting, a testament to the unresting souls trapped within. And in quiet moments, when the world was still and the shadows long, I would hear their whispers, a reminder of the unseen that lingers just beyond our comprehension. When I first came upon the abandoned farmhouse, it stood amidst a sprawling sunlit field, a silhouette of forgotten times. The sky, an endless expanse of blue, stretched above it, punctuated occasionally by the cries of distant birds. The farmhouse seemed to belong to another era, with its peeling white paint and sagging roof. Yet there was a certain peace about it that drew me in. It was a place I stumbled upon during one of my aimless drives, a habit I had taken to in search of tranquility amidst the chaos of my daily life. The surrounding landscape was a quilt of golden grains, gently swaying in the breeze, their whispers barely audible over the chirping of cicadas. I felt strangely at home here, in this pastoral solitude. Curiosity led me to wander closer, past the rusting remnants of farming equipment that lay scattered like forgotten toys. The front door creaked open under the slightest pressure, as if welcoming me into its folds. Inside, the air was cool and still, undisturbed by human presence for what seemed like decades. Dust motes danced lazily in shafts of light that pierced through the boarded windows. I wandered from room to room, each space filled with the musty scent of aged wood and memories long since faded. In the living room, a grand fireplace stood as the centerpiece, its stonework blackened by countless fires that had once warmed the souls inhabiting this house. Above it, a wooden mantel supported a collection of photographs, their frames tarnished with time. Faces of a once happy family smiled down, their eyes holding secrets of a life now lost. I traced a finger across one of the frames, disturbing the dust that had settled like a protective veil over the images. As I lingered, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping into my bones. It was as though the house itself was watching me, its silence pregnant with untold stories. The feeling was fleeting, overshadowed by the allure of this forgotten sanctuary. Still, I decided to leave, though I promised myself I would return. There was something about the house that called to me, a whisper on the edge of consciousness that promised revelations. In the following weeks, I became a regular visitor. I brought with me a notebook and a camera, hoping to capture the essence of the place. Each visit revealed new details, subtle changes in the atmosphere that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The farmhouse had become a part of my routine, a refuge from the relentless pace of modern life. It was during one such visit that I first noticed the disturbance. It was a brisk autumn afternoon, the sky marbled with gray clouds threatening rain. I had settled in the living room, leafing through my notes, when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible music. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, but the melody persisted, weaving through the halls like a ghostly symphony. It was a haunting tune, both beautiful and melancholic, drawing me deeper into the house's embrace. I followed the sound to a room at the end of a narrow corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the music ceased abruptly, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The room was empty, save for a single rocking chair that swayed gently as though someone had just vacated it. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to rationalize what I had experienced. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had awakened something within the house. My dreams were plagued by visions of the farmhouse, its once inviting presence now overshadowed by a sense of foreboding. I saw the family from the photographs, their spectral forms wandering the halls, searching for something lost. I woke in a cold sweat, the echoes of their cries lingering in my mind. The next day, I returned to the farmhouse, driven by a desire to understand the source of my unease. The air was heavy with anticipation as I crossed the threshold, the familiar creaks and groans of the old wood echoing my own apprehension. The house was different now, its silence charged with an energy that prickled at my skin. In the kitchen, I found the table set for dinner, plates and utensils laid out as though expecting guests. This was new, a detail I knew had not been there before. The sight sent a chill down my spine, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. Instead, I wandered through the house, each step accompanied by the feeling of being watched. In the upstairs hallway, I paused before a mirror. My reflection stared back, weary and unnerved. As I turned away, I caught a glimpse of movement in the glass, a shadow that flickered and disappeared. It was then that I understood. The house was not empty. It was inhabited by the remnants of those who had lived and died within its walls. The days that followed were a blur of restlessness and mounting dread. I couldn't escape the feeling that the spirits of the farmhouse were reaching out to me, their presence growing stronger with each visit. I became obsessed, returning to the house time and again, hoping to uncover the truth behind its haunting. One evening, as twilight descended, I found myself drawn back to the room with the rocking chair. The air was thick with tension as I crossed the threshold, the familiar melody playing softly in the background. I felt a chill pass through me as the chair began to rock, its motion deliberate and unnerving. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room. Panic surged through me, but as I struggled to open the door, a voice whispered in the darkness. A child's voice, pleading and forlorn. It spoke of a tragedy, of lives cut short and dreams shattered. The desperation in its tone tugged at my heart, and I realized that the spirits sought closure, a release from their endless wandering. In that moment, I understood my role. I was the bridge between the living and the dead, the one who could bring peace to the unresting souls. With a resolve born of empathy, I set about uncovering the history of the farmhouse, piecing together the fragments of its past. Through old records and local tales, I learned of the family that had lived there, a prosperous farmer, his wife, and their 2 children. Their lives were marred by a series of misfortunes, culminating in a tragic fire that consumed the house and claimed their lives. The details were sparse, but the weight of their sorrow was palpable. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the farmhouse one final time. The spirits awaited me, their presence a palpable force that filled the air. I spoke to them, recounting their story with compassion and understanding. As I did, the house seemed to sigh, its tension easing as the spirits found solace in my words. The melody played once more, a final, lingering note that resonated in the quiet. The rocking chair stilled, the shadows retreated, and the oppressive silence lifted. I felt a sense of peace settle over the farmhouse, as though the souls within had finally found rest. As I left the farmhouse for the last time, I knew that I had been changed by the experience. The haunting had been more than a brush with the supernatural. It was a reminder of the connections that bind us, both in life and beyond. The farmhouse stood as a testament to those bonds, a silent witness to the stories of those who had come before. Even now, as I drive past the field where the farmhouse once stood, I feel its presence, a quiet whisper on the wind that speaks of the past and the enduring nature of the human spirit. The memories linger, a gentle reminder of the unresting souls who had once called it home. And though the house is gone, its story continues, etched forever in the fabric of time. The farmhouse stood at the edge of an expansive field, its windows like sunken eyes that had seen too much. Over the years, It had acquired a reputation in the small town of Marrowville. The stories varied. Tales of shadows moving without cause, whispered conversations with no participants, and music drifting through the air when the world around it was silent. My interest in the farmhouse wasn't born out of mere curiosity. It was necessity. After my parents' sudden passing, I had inherited the place. It was far from a prime real estate opportunity, and with funds dwindling, I decided the time had come to either sell it or at least see if there was anything of value left. On a brisk autumn morning, under a sky painted with the muted colors of a fading season, I set out to explore the depths of my inheritance. The road to the farmhouse was riddled with whispers of leaves that seemed to move of their own volition, the crunch of gravel underfoot offering a rhythm to my otherwise silent journey. I had visited the farmhouse a few times as a child, but memories of those visits were hazy and fragmented, like a half-remembered dream. My parents never spoke much about it, and now I was the sole keeper of whatever secrets it might hold. The first day I arrived, the house was just as I remembered it, if not more decrepit. The paint had long since peeled away, and the wooden boards groaned under the weight of time. As I pushed open the front door, a chill crept up my spine, not from the cold, but from something intrinsic and unsettling. The air was thick with stagnation, a testament to years of neglect. I wandered through the rooms, each layered with dust that seemed to dance in the shafts of light cutting through the windows. It was curious how some parts of the house still retained a semblance of their former beauty. The parlor, though unfurnished, had ornate moldings, and the fireplace still bore the mark of artistry in its stonework. Yet, there was a tangible sense of something else, an undercurrent of unease that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. As evening approached and the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I settled into what might have once been a dining room. I had brought a sleeping bag and some supplies, planning to stay the night. Despite the unsettling aura of the place, I was determined to uncover whatever lingered here. It was in the gathering darkness that the first disturbance occurred. It started as a soft melody, a tune that was both unfamiliar and strangely nostalgic. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind, perhaps the melody of leaves brushing against one another. But as I concentrated, the sound became clearer, emanating from somewhere deeper within the house. Entranced, I followed the music, descending a flight of stairs into the basement, a place I had avoided earlier due to its oppressive aura. The melody grew louder, almost beckoning me to come closer. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw an old gramophone in the corner, its handle turning slowly as if guided by an invisible hand. I approached cautiously, the music wrapping around me like a siren's call. The room was filled with an array of forgotten objects, old furniture, trunks filled with garments from an era long past, and an assortment of family portraits, their faces obscured by age and dust. What struck me most, however, was the gramophone itself. It was impossible for it to play without someone winding it. Yet here it was, spinning a hauntingly beautiful tune. My hands shook slightly as I reached out to touch the gramophone, feeling the cold metal beneath my fingers. As quickly as the music had begun, it stopped, leaving a silence so profound that it seemed to echo. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the air around me pulsating with an intangible energy. When I finally turned back, my breath caught in my throat. The portraits on the walls had changed during my brief distraction. The figures in the frames seemed clearer, their eyes fixated on me with an unsettling intensity, expressions frozen in a tableau of silent screams. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a stack of old books. Something had shifted. An invisible line crossed, and though the music had ceased, the feeling of being watched intensified. In the following days, my exploration of the farmhouse became a routine of sorts. Each morning I would wake to the sound of silence, and as the day progressed, the house's eerie presence grew more palpable. Objects seemed to move on their own accord. Chairs that I'd left pushed against the table would be found in the middle of the room. Curtains that had been drawn were now open, swaying gently as if caressed by unseen hands. My nights were plagued by unsettling dreams, visions of people I had never met, their voices a cacophony of whispers that spoke of longing and despair. It was as if the farmhouse itself was trying to communicate, to convey a message that was just beyond my grasp. I spent hours in the library, poring over old journals and letters, piecing together fragments of a story that seemed embedded in the very walls. One particular evening, as a storm raged outside, I found myself drawn back to the basement. The sense of foreboding had become a part of me, an ever-present shadow that I could neither shake nor fully understand. The gramophone now stood silent in its corner, yet the basement felt alive with a tense energy. As lightning illuminated the room, I noticed something new, a small door, half hidden behind a stack of crates. It intrigued me, this secret passage that had escaped my notice. With a hesitant push, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor that led further into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and curiosity, propelling me forward. The corridor opened up into a small chamber, and as I stepped inside, the air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light. In the center of the chamber stood an ornate mirror, its surface covered in a layer of grime. As I wiped it clean, a flash of movement caught my eye, and I realized the reflection was not my own. In the mirror, the room appeared different, filled with people dressed in clothes from another era. They moved about, seemingly unaware of my presence. A young woman with long dark hair caught my gaze, and for a moment, our eyes locked. Her expression was one of deep sadness, and as she opened her mouth to speak, a soundless scream erupted, the agony of it resonating in the pit of my stomach. I stumbled backward, breaking the connection, the chamber now as it was before, empty save for the mirror. Yet the memory of her face lingered, a ghostly imprint that refused to fade. It was then that I realized the truth. The house was not merely haunted, it was a prison, a purgatory for souls unable to find peace. The days that followed were a blur, each one blending into the next. I became consumed by the need to understand, to somehow free the souls trapped within those walls. I delved into the farmhouse's history, discovering a narrative of tragedy and loss. It was once the home of a prosperous family, the Hawthorns, who had met a series of unfortunate fates. The details were murky, but it was clear that something terrible had happened, leaving an indelible mark on the house. My own connection to the house became increasingly fraught, the line between the living and the dead blurring as nights of fitful sleep were filled with haunting visions. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a constant companion, a chorus of voices that echoed in the corners of my mind. On the final night, as another storm descended, I found myself back in the basement, standing before the mirror. Desperation clung to me like a second skin, and in the depths of the glass, I saw the young woman again, her eyes pleading with silent urgency. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold surface, and the room around me dissolved. I was no longer in the basement, but in the past, an observer to the events that had bound the souls to the farmhouse. I watched as the family, unaware of the darkness lurking within their home, fell victim to unseen forces. The young woman, Maria, was at the center of it all, her spirit the most tormented. It was her sorrow, her anguish, that resonated most deeply, a tragedy that had echoed through time. As the vision unfolded, I understood the truth. The house was a vessel, a conduit for the unresting souls, and I, inadvertently, had become a part of its cursed history. The realization hit me with a force that left me breathless, and as the vision faded, I was pulled back into the present, standing alone in the basement once more. Though I longed to help, I knew there was little I could do. The house's power was beyond my understanding, its secrets buried beneath layers of time. Yet, as I gazed into the mirror one last time, I felt a shift, a subtle change in the air. The souls were still there, but their presence was less oppressive, as if acknowledging my efforts, my empathy. I left the farmhouse with a heavy heart, the weight of its history a burden I would carry. Though I had not freed the souls, I had, in some small way, made peace with their existence. The farmhouse remained a sentinel of mystery, its windows watching the world with silent, knowing eyes. Back in Marrowville, the stories continued. Whispers of the haunted farmhouse passed from one generation to the next. Yet, for me, the experience was a reminder of the blurred lines between past and present, the living and the dead. The farmhouse was a place where time stood still, where memories lingered like shadows, waiting to be acknowledged. And though I had left, a part of me remained, bound to the house by an invisible thread, a connection that transcended the confines of mortality. The unresting souls of the farmhouse were a part of me now, their stories etched into my own, a testament to the enduring nature of memory and the human spirit.